This is a failure of the parties of God, and it's not something that happens because people misinterpret the texts. It's because they believe in them. That's the problem. Thank you.
Tony, would you like a quick rejoinder, or can I move on to our final question for this session?
If you like.
Well, great. We have I think, the perfect final question. And it's from another student at the Munk School for Global Affairs, Dana Wagner. Where are you, Dana? Here you are.
A big part of this issue is our inability to stand in another's shoes with an open mind to understand a different worldview. In this regard, can each of you tell us which of your opponent's arguments is the most convincing? Thank you.
Right. Now, this definitely never happened in the House of Commons. I think that the most convincing argument is, and the argument that people of faith have got to deal with, is actually the argument that Christopher's just made, which is that the bad that is done in the name of religion is intrinsically grounded in the scripture of religion. Right? That is the single most difficult argument. And since I've said it's a really difficult argument, I suppose I better give an answer to it. My answer to it is this, that there is, of course, that debate that goes on within religion, which is the degree to which, as it were, you look at Scripture, abstracted from its time, you pick out individual parts of it, you use those in order to justify whatever view you like, or whether, as I tried to do in my opening, you actually say, well, what is the essence of that faith? And what is the essence of Scripture? And of course, then what you realize is that, yes, of course, if you believe as a Muslim that we should live our lives according to the 7th century, then you will end up with some very extreme positions. But actually there are masses of Muslims who completely reject that as a view of Islam. And instead say, no, of course, the Prophet back then was somebody who brought order and stability, and actually, for example, even though we today would want equality for women, and many, again, despite what people say, many Muslims would agree with that as well, and many Muslim women, obviously. Back then, actually, what he did was extraordinary for that time. And also, when you look at Christianity, yes, of course, you can point to issues that, of that time, now seem very strange and outdated. But on the other hand, when you take Christianity as a whole and ask what it means to those, what draws people to it, what is it that made me as a student come to Christianity? It wasn't to do with some of the things that Christopher's just been describing, and I understand there are those traditions within religion. I understand that. I accept that. I see how people look at certain parts of Scripture and draw those conclusions from it. But it's not what it means to me. It's not the essence of it. The essence of it is, through the life of Jesus Christ, is a life of love and selflessness and sacrifice. And that's what it means to me. And so I think the most difficult thing for people of faith is to be able to explain Scripture in a way that makes sense to people in the modern world. And one of the things that we have actually begun recently is a dialogue called The Common Word, which is about Muslims and Christians trying to come together and through Scripture find a common basis of cooperation and mutual respect. So, yes, it is a difficult argument. That is the most difficult argument. I agree. But I also think there is an answer to it. And I think one of the values, actually, of having a debate like this, and in a sense having someone making that point as powerfully as Christopher has made it, is that it does force people of faith to recognize that we have to deal with this argument, to take it on, and to make sure that not just in what we are trying to do, but in how we interpret our faith, we are making sure that what I describe as the essence of faith, which is serving God through the love of others, is indeed reflected not just in what we do, but in the doctrines and the practice of our religion.
Admirable question. Thank you for it. The remark Tony made that I most agreed with this evening, I'll just hope that doesn't sound too minimal, was when he said that if religion was to disappear, things would by no means, as it were, automatically be okay. I mean, he phrased it better than that. But it would be what I regard as a necessary condition, would certainly not be a sufficient one. And anyway, religion won't disappear. I just think the hold of it on people's minds can be substantially broken and domesticated. He's quite right about that, of course. I hope I didn't seem at any point to have argued to the contrary. I come before you, after all, as a materialist. If we give up religion, we discover what actually we know already, whether we're religious or not, which is that we are somewhat imperfectly evolved primates on a very small planet in a very unimportant suburb of a solar system that is itself a negligible part of a very rapidly expanding and blowing apart cosmic phenomenon. These conclusions, to me, are a great deal more awe-inspiring than what's contained in any burning bush or horse that flies overnight to Jerusalem or any other of that. It's a great deal more awe-inspiring, as is any look through the Hubble telescope at what our real nature and future really is. So he was quite right to say that, and I would have been entirely wrong if I'd implied otherwise. I think I could say a couple of things for religion myself, would in fact. First is what I call the apotropaic. We all have it, the desire not to be found claiming all the credit. A certain kind of modesty, you could almost say humility. People will therefore say they'll thank God when something happens that they are grateful for, or there's no need to make this a religious thing. The Greeks had the concept of hubris as something to be avoided and criticized. But what the Greeks would also have called the apotropaic, the view that not all the glory can be claimed by a load of primates like ourselves, is a healthy reminder too. Second, the sense that there's something beyond the material, or if not beyond it, not entirely consistent materially with it, is, I think, a very important matter. What you could call the numinous, or the transcendent, or at its best, I suppose, the ecstatic. I wouldn't trust anyone in this hall who didn't know what I was talking about. We know what we mean by it when we think about certain kinds of music, perhaps. Certainly the relationship, or the coincidence, but sometimes very powerful, between music and love. Landscape, certain kinds of artistic and creative work that appears not to have been done entirely by hand. Without this, we really would merely be primates. I think it's very important to appreciate the finesse of that, and I think religion has done a very good job in enshrining it in music and in architecture, not so much in painting, in my opinion. And I think it's actually very important that we learn to distinguish the numinous in this way. I wrote a book about the Parthenon. I'll mention it briefly. I couldn't live without the Parthenon. I don't believe any civilized person could. If it was to be destroyed, you'd feel something much worse than the destruction of the first temple had occurred, it seems to me. But we've lost an enormous amount besides, by way of our knowledge of symmetry and grace and harmony. But I don't care about the cult of Pallas Athena. It's gone. And as far as I know, it's not to be missed. The Eleusinian mysteries have been demystified. The sacrifices, some of them human, that were made to those gods are regrettable, but have been blotted out and forgotten. And Athenian imperialism is also a thing of the past. What remains is the fantastic beauty and the faith that built it. The question is how to keep what is of value of this sort in art and in our own emotions and in our finer feelings, the numinous, the transcendent. I'll go as far as the ecstatic, and to distinguish it precisely from superstition and the supernatural, which are designed to make us fearful and afraid and servile, and which sometimes succeed only too well. Thank you.
Well, it's now time for the final act in our debate, closing statements. We'll do that in the reverse order of our opening remarks. So, Christopher, I'm going to call on you again to speak. Your closing remarks, please.
I'm not ready.
Okay.
I didn't know it was coming. And Tony, what do you say? Would you rather have another question? There's so many people who've got them.
I'm happy.
I'd rather answer another question.
Let's take another question. Okay.
In other words, don't run away with the idea I'd run out of stuff, okay? Yes, I'd rather be provoked. Someone could do that.
Sure. Well, let's do that. And I guess we'll give Christopher a pause here, a chance to drink and catch his breath. And Tony, go to you on this, the whole question of, which has been at the center of this debate, on the rigidity or flexibility of religious doctrine. Your church, the Catholic Church, has just made a reversal of sorts on its policy around the use of condoms, allowed explicitly and only for the prevention of HIV/AIDS infection. Is that a positive? Is that an expression of flexibility, or a critique of the decades of rigidity before this reversal?
Well, I welcome it. But you know, I mean, I'm one of the, I think, billion lay Catholics. So I don't, and I think many Catholics have different views on a whole range of issues upon which there is teaching by the Church. I just wanted to pick up something, if I might, that Christopher said, because I thought his discussion of the transcendent was very interesting, actually. I mean, for those of us of religious faith, we acknowledge and believe that there is a power higher and separate from human power. And in a way what Christopher is saying is, well, I can't accept that, but I do accept there is something transcendent in the human experience, and something numinous, something even ecstatic. You see, for me, the belief in a higher power and the fact that we should be obedient to the will of that power, not simply our own will, I don't regard that as putting me in a position of servility, is not the word I would use. I would use the word obligation. And, you know, it is of course absolutely true that when I can point to any of the acts that I say are inspired by religious faith, you can say, well, they could easily have been inspired by humanism. But I think that for those of us that are of faith and do believe that there is something actually more than simply the human power, this does give you, I think, a humility. It's not all that can give you a humility, but it does. I think, and I have witnessed this myself, I remember, actually again to refer to Northern Ireland, when I met some of the people who were the relatives of those who died in the Omagh bombing, which came actually after the Good Friday Agreement and was the worst terrorist attack in the history of Northern Ireland. And I went to visit the relatives of the victims, and I remember a man saying to me that who had lost his loved one in the bombing, saying to me, you know, I have prayed about this, and I want you to know that this terrible act should make you all the more determined to reach peace and to not stop your quest for peace. And it is completely true that, of course, he could have come to such an extraordinary, and I would say transcendent view of forgiveness and compassion. without religious faith.